Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you can see, I'm joined by independent journalist and war correspondent Elijah Magnier. Thank you so much for joining me, Elijah. We have a lot to get to because the U.S. and Israel have begun their kinetic war, their all-out war on Iran. Thanks so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, everyone hit the like button. That helps boost the stream as we get to this critical show here. So, Elijah, first, your overall assessment. I think what Israel is calling it is what Roaring Lion, their operation. The U.S. says this is Operation Epic Fury. They have conducted major airstrikes in Iran. They've targeted civilian infrastructure. We've seen over 40 children, I believe, at a school bombed by Israel. And we know that the United States was sending Tomahawks through Iraqi airspace. We can go on and on and on. Iran is now retaliated as well. So how about we get to first your assessment before we get into pulling up anything at all, your assessment of what has happened here and where we are now.
Thank you for having me. Well, first of all, let me start with it is actually not a lion Israeli war because the Israelis did not go to war on their own. When they did that in June 2025, they failed and they asked President Donald Trump for support to stop the war. And it is not a fury from the American side because this is a war on behalf of Israel. Actually, it is to impose Israel as, or not impose, to try to impose Israel as the only power in the Middle East that can intimidate or bully or impose on all the countries in the Middle East whatever the Israeli want. And this is the theory of Benjamin Netanyahu, who said, I don't really need to bother to ask the Arab to sign a deal. Once Iran is gone, then everybody will knock my door. So that is all about. It is a war to cripple Iran's economy and military infrastructure so that can lead to the fall of the ruling system in Iran. And why I'm saying that is because both leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, said this morning that the objective of this war, and I quote them, is to change the regime in Iran. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu was a little bit more careful than Donald Trump. He said he wants to create the circumstances to change the regime. And in my understanding, covering different wars around the Middle East, it reminds me of 1990s, the war on Iraq, when the bombardment of Iraq and the sanctions imposed on Iraq, Saddam Hussein at that time, food for oil, led to the fall of the Saddam Hussein ruling system in Iraq after a few years when the country was crippled in its economy. So basically, what we have seen today are two operations. The Israelis went on a personal attack to kill the leaders. Benjamin Netanyahu loves the theatrical side of any war, and Donald Trump selected the objective of military position, military target. So on one side, you have the Israelis killing political and military leaders. This is not something that happened in the June 2025 because Israel told us that they went to kill the foreign minister, the president, the Iranian leader, all the top senior commanders, as they have tried to do in June 2025 when they killed the senior military commanders. And now they're killing the political commandership. Therefore, it is completely different. And we see how the Israelis are acting. We imagine that in the coming days, the war is going to be much more nasty, and that the Americans and the Israelis will target the infrastructure, the energy, the electricity, the gas, the oil, the harbor, the transport, communication system, everything that can sustain a country to make sure that Iran will never be able to stand on its feet when there are, of course, sanctions imposed at the same time. and that will be extremely difficult for Iran to recover very quickly. And they want to create the perfect scenario for the Iranian people to stand against the ruling system and then try to change it from within, when the American and the Israelis have created the perfect scenario and setup for people to stand against their ruling system, because the country will not be able to provide what a country should provide for its population.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's great points, Elijah. Now, here we have some unsuccessful attempts. The Israeli airstrikes that you mentioned did not succeed in getting and assassinating the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And the same goes for the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. Of course, this is just the first day of the strikes. I'm sure that there are going to be many more, as you said. But I wanted to ask you about what has happened, Elijah? What has the U.S. and Israel struck? First, let's get to this before we get into the Iranian retaliation, which was also quite rapid. But first, what has the U.S. and Israel hit so far? And does it conform to what you believe is going to happen in the coming days as well?
Well, at the first beginning, the normal procedure is to hit all the defense system, so all jets can have a free control over the Iranian airspace. And for that, the Israelis and the Americans need to destroy any potential threat on their jets where they can operate anywhere in Iran, because Iran, at the end of the day, is 1,640,000 square kilometers. It's huge. It's a continent, more or less. And they have 4 seasons, which means that the effective of Iran are spread in the north, in the south, and the east and the west. And we've seen today some of these strikes in different sides of the country. We've seen strike in Sistan, Baluchistan, on the Pakistani Afghani border, so it's in the southeast. And then we have seen also in the northwest, in Kurdistan, we've seen in the middle, in Tehran, in Isfahan, in Karj, in so many other cities where some of them are known to host the military missile program. And this is what Donald Trump said, that he will destroy the Iranian missile program. Now, from the 2025 June war, the Iranian understood that they cannot keep their missiles on trucks and come out, because of the possibility of the Israelis and the Americans to dominate the sky. Therefore, they went to silos under the ground, where they can launch missiles from different sides of the country, different parts. It makes more difficult for the Israeli and the Americans, even with the control of the total sky over Iran, to stop these missiles from being launched. Now, I think both sides, the Israelis and the Americans, understand the impossibility to destroy the Iranian missile program. So they're going to try and destroy as much as they can, and where they have information, where they see missile launch, because with the satellite today, it's very easy to identify the location of the launching. Nevertheless, because Iran has thousands of ballistic missiles, what we have seen from the Iranian side is interesting today. Well, you want to talk about it separately, but yes, you made some comments. But the objective of the Israeli and the Americans now is to try and kill the Minister of Defense, the head of the IRGC, the commanders in the control and command and control centers, which they have failed, obviously, from the Iranian reaction, and we'll come to that. And then they would hit the radars. They will destroy the Navy to make sure they do not represent threat against their carriers. But for that, they need also to destroy the surface-to-surface missiles that can hit these carriers. And within, we're talking about hundreds of kilometers. If we're talking about surface-to-surface and ballistic missile, we're talking about more than 1,700 to 2,000 kilometers. So This is not an easy battle. This is why Benjamin Netanyahu learned the mistake from Gaza and Lebanon, did not really set the bar very high, unlike Donald Trump, and said to create the conditions because he knows this might not succeed today. But for Netanyahu, as we're talking about him, this is a personal war. It's not only about the destruction of Iran and his control, but it is to cover up his failure on the 7th of October. This is the only way he can get away with it in front of the Israeli society and say, hey, look, I failed on the 7th of October, but now I succeeded with Iran. But because so far, although he destroyed Gaza, he set back Hezbollah, he did not manage to destroy Hamas, because he's still asking to disarm Hamas, or to destroy Hezbollah, because none have raised the white flag and they both keep building up their forces.
Well, let's then, we can of course circle back to all of this, Elijah, but let's now get to that Iranian retaliation because um, I'm seeing reports that the US military analysts have been a bit surprised by how rapidly Iran was able to strike back. Actually, I believe during the 12-day war, it took about 18 hours for Iran to recalibrate due to the surprise attack by Israel with US help, of course. This time around, not so much. There has been an operation launched very rapidly. This is, it's called, I'm probably butchering this, Khatam al-Tufan, meaning putting an end to the storm or the deluge. So I'm saying putting an end to the flood, in reference to Al-Aqsa flood that began October 7, 2023. And I'm just going to play a few. I'll put them on mute. I'll just play a few of the videos as you're speaking about, we can look at, for example, Bahrain was hit. This is actually from a U.S. Personnel who is actually panicking quite hard because he is seeing, I'll put the volume on a little bit. He is seeing what's going on by his window in Bahrain.
Oh, shit.
Where he can actually see what's going on there. There are missiles coming down on the base there in Bahrain. Then we also have another image of the same area. I believe the base there is called, Elijah, the Fifth Fleet, I believe. Is that correct? That is where we are seeing reports of hits by Iran. Here is, I believe, Al Udeid or Qatar. So we see just plumes of smoke coming out. This is all happening within a very short period of time after Israel and the U.S. struck. And then here's Abu Dhabi in the UAE also experiencing Iranian retaliation. So maybe you can talk about, Elijah, how or what you have assessed in terms of Iran's response to these strikes, how rapid they were, and whether the reports are true that this has caught the U.S. by surprise and maybe perhaps Israel as well.
Well, first of all, let me make one point clear. Last night, the Iranians and their allies knew that the bombardment is going to come today and the war is coming. So that was not a surprise. However, it's very easy to say it when it is not possible to prove it. Nevertheless, in June 2025, the Iranians were taken by surprise. During the negotiation, the Americans gave a go to the Israeli to start the war, and the Israeli managed to kill most of the top leaders. Now, in this position, it is important for the Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei to rename and appoint a new leader. And they've understood the mechanism. This is why it took a long time. Also, many of these center of control and command were destroyed in June 25 in the first hour of the attack. This time is different because first, we see several points in the Iranian retaliation. First, there is a need to assess what the attacking forces are targeting. Sorry. because we have seen Iran targeting the Israelis in the same way. So if Israel targets only and exclusively military objectives, then the Iranian go and target exactly the same research center or military base, IRGC center. On the other side, they target the elite forces, the Israeli elite center, etc. So they really create a balance, and for that, they need an initial assessment. During June 2025, most leaders, particularly the missile commander, uh, was killed in the first attack. What Iran did is exactly what the other allies like Hezbollah are doing. So there is no one commander that can control the unit, but there are several sub commanders that can replace the commander and his vice and his vice. So you have at least 4 people in every position that do not exist in the same place, have the same knowledge, the same information, and the same instruction what to target and when, depending on the capability of every unit. This is why we have seen now a very fast reaction from the Iranians, from the launching missiles from different locations. But another point we have seen from the morning until just an hour ago, Iran using old type of missiles. How do we know that? It's because the missile needed between 12 to 10 minutes to reach the objectives in Israel. However, in the large launching of the missile, when the Israelis were warning the people to go to the shelter, the missiles were already above Israel, which means that now we are back to specific kind of ballistic missiles that reach Israel between 5 to 6 minutes, which means that the Iranians are now introducing among the old missiles also a few new missiles, which means that the Iranians are acting in full control, and they want to overflood the Israeli interception missiles system, the American interception missile system, and their allies, because the British are in that with them, to intercept the missiles. But also we have seen Iran launching kind of really, I'm not going to say primitive, but old missiles against the Gulf countries, US military bases in Qatar, Al Udeid, in the Emirates, particularly in the Emirates for its known very close relationship with Israel, in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Jordan, but not Oman. So we have seen also in Erbil, Kurdistan. So the Iranians are making sure that the message reaches, a political message reaches the American people and the American politicians, turning against Donald Trump and saying, well, look, the Iranians are fighting back. They promised to bomb the US bases, even if they were evacuated, and they kept their promise, which is not new because they've done it in 2020 when the Israeli killed General Qasem Soleimani. In January 2020 in Iraq, the Iranian bombed Al Anbar US air base in Iraq. And then again, they bombed in June 2025 when the Americans bombed the Iranian nuclear site, and the Iranian retaliated against the US based in Al Udeid in Qatar. Therefore, we have seen now the first move of the Iranians saying, this is what I'm going to do. All the countries in the Middle East will be involved. Now we're talking only about US bases. The Iranians have not started with the navigation and the sea blockage, not yet. Therefore, this is a card that Iran is showing it is fully capable of using, damaging the world economy. And that is also an invitation to all the Arab countries to put pressure on Donald Trump to stop the war, because they know what is coming if this war lasts for weeks or for months. Donald Trump has 60 plus 30, 90 days to act without the approval of the Congress. I don't think it can last for 90 days. I think if the Americans want to bomb for 4 days to 1 week, then they really have to use all the mighty power they have to cripple the Iranian economy and create a real economic damage on Iran without bringing down the ruling system. But for that, the Iranians will also bomb the energy resources in the Gulf that the Iranian know where and that the American and the European and the rest of the world benefit from to make sure that everybody is going to pay the price is not only Iran. And why I'm saying that is because the Americans and the Israelis told Iran that their objective is to destroy the Iranian current ruling system, which means they are telling the Iranians, we're going to kill you and destroy you. This is where the Iranians are put with their shoulders against the wall, and the only way they have is to fight, but to fight with all their power.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure you remember, Elijah, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff head of the United States, Dan Raisin Kane, as he calls himself, said to Donald Trump, according to reports, that once this thing begins, it's not clear where it ends because of U.S. limitations as well as unknown Iranian capabilities. And now I think what we are seeing, and it seems like what we're seeing, is that Iran has so quickly responded that it's obvious. I'm wondering if you would comment on. It was thought that that Iran's missile system was actually heavily depleted, and you're telling me that Iran is actually just beginning with older missiles, and which means that there are likely more advanced ones still yet to be even administered. So maybe you can comment on this.
Well, my knowledge on how Iran acts is Iran never plays all its cards in one go, and it has a lot of patience. This is why it is important to know how the interception missile system works. One missile cannot bring down another missile. The interception missile system may need to fire 3 and 4, and it is not perfect. The Israelis said that today because we've seen many missiles falling on Israel and exploding. And the Israelis invited the inhabitant to seek shelter, and they said the interception system is not perfect. So when the Iranian launch old missile system and sneak in 2 or 3, these 2 or 3 are enough to create serious damage on the objective they are reaching and escape all the interception missile system, because the interception missile system cannot stop the modern Iranian ballistic missiles, and we've seen the proof in June 2025. And we have seen also the large destruction these missiles can cause, and we have seen also the limitation of the quantity of interception missile system in Israel, even if the Americans made sure to fill up all the Israeli needs of interception missile system and installed others in Greece and Cyprus. They have carriers in the sea, they have jet in the air also to intercept missile system, incoming missile system, but not in the area where it's falling, because then it will endanger also the jets, the Allied jets in the air. So this is not a war that the Americans and the Israeli can sustain for very long, because they really don't have enough. But for Israel, for Iran, the Tehran need to think as if this war is going to last for many months ahead. It cannot use all its power in the first week and say, okay, now I have nothing to fight back, and the Americans can continue bombing me with the Israelis. For the Iranians, it's important to launch between 100 to 200 missiles in the first day when we talk about old missile system, and then to launch between 15 to 20 per day and no more. These are the modern missiles that can hit these 15 and 20 target and inflict real pain. In Iran, they understand that every missile that falls on Israel, one who are going to scream are not the Israeli citizen, but the Americans who are going to scream, because This is where it will be felt in Washington more than in Tel Aviv. However, it doesn't mean the Americans will get away with it. They already have their image hit because Iran is the first country in the world in modern warfare that attacks so many American bases
Yes.
simultaneously and challenges the most powerful country in the world ready to fight back and continue the fight without being flexible. This is something that Donald Trump brought to America, where it is shaking its image. Even if he hits Iran, Iran doesn't need to win. Iran doesn't need to lose and need to continue fighting back. That for Iran is a victory.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was thinking as I was scouring all of, and I'll pull some more up, all of the images of Iran's retaliation. Some may scoff and
I
say,
can't hear you.
oh, can you hear me? Hello, hello. Elijah, can you hear me? I believe. Okay, let's see. I don't know why we lost. Maybe you can come back. Hold on. I don't know what's happening, but maybe go to your settings. Well, I was going to maybe you can reload, refresh, private chat. There's a private chat in the see if that works. Okay. Maybe refresh. Hold on. Go to what? Do you have your? Okay. Be refresh. Can you go to your phone and check? Refresh, and I'll bring you back. Okay. I'll bring you back. All right. So Elijah will come back. Because I was going to ask him that as I was watching the retaliation by Iran, I was thinking to myself that Iran is indeed making history. And here's Elijah right now. Let's see if he can hear me now. Can you hear me now, Elijah?
Yes, I can. Yes.
I don't know what happened there, but I wanted to ask you, given everything that you said, as I was scouring all of the footage and the reports of Iran's retaliation, I was thinking about how this is historic, because you can think back to all of the wars that the U.S. has waged in the past. We often say, even on this show, the U.S. has lost a lot of wars. However, the U.S. has never been hit back with this kind of technology, with this kind of weaponry, this fast, in response to its own assault. I don't think ever in its history. I mean, Vietnam, Afghanistan, we go on and on and on, all the wars that the U.S. has lost. This time around, though, the United States now has to contend with its bases from Bahrain to Kuwait to there are reports Saudi Arabia, on and on and on, being hit. And then, Elijah, I'm just going to pull this up. We haven't even gotten into the potential of this turning into also a problem for the United States in terms of, I need to find it here. Here we go. The naval assets, Elijah, because there have been reports that Iran has already sent out drones on the USS Abraham Lincoln. Now there are breaking reports that they have struck a combat support vessel with missiles. We know that the USS Gerald Ford is, backing up Israel right now and has its own internal problems. So any reaction to this? Because all this stuff, all of these developments are kind of ongoing.
Yes, we will see a lot of the use of drones and other missiles and kind of Tomahawk missiles used in this war, not only the jet or ballistic missiles, because it's important on both sides to keep engaging one another to make sure that the defense system is more exposed or it is flooded. And for that, we know that the US carriers are not really the game changer in this war, because the Americans and the Israelis need to send effectively at least between 30 to 50 jets that are bombing at the same time. And for that, they need much more as escort, and they need to refill in the air. So there is going to be a lot of pressure on the effective of the Americans and the Israelis to conduct this war. Timing is going to be crucial. For how long they're going to do it. If they want to go for a long war, which I doubt Donald Trump can sustain that, and certainly Israel cannot, then on a long war, they can lose what they capitalize on in the first day. But if they want to do a short war, then the outcome is not achieved. And in every war, we do not look at what has been damaged. We look at the achievement of the objectives. If the Israelis and the Americans will achieve their objectives or not. If they fail to achieve the objectives, then this war was not a win for the Americans and the Israelis, even if they are, for the first time, coordinating this scale of attack. But not this is the first time they coordinate. In every war they started, or the Israelis started, the Americans were present. Even on Gaza, the Israelis could not do it on their own. At the first beginning, Joe Biden sent 2,000 Delta Force to Israel, and he sent cargo plane and Navy to support the Israelis, to intercept missiles, everything, all the support Israel can get. Israel cannot conduct a war on its own. For that, this is going to be a failure for Israel or the Americans, or they're going to succeed together in changing the ruling system in Iran. And this is not going to happen from one day or another. And it's certainly not going to happen during this war, because the rioters and the manifestation took place already at the end of December, beginning of January, and that was under control by the Iranian authority. Therefore, we cannot think that the Israeli and the Americans will have local support for them, but inevitably they will have people unhappy about the economic situation that's going to they will be left with. I remember the Iran-Iraq war that I covered on the ground when Hashemi Rafsanjani was president. He lost at the end of the war because there are consequences after a war, economic consequences that people stand against and want to change. So how do they want this change? Do they want to change the entire ruling system, or they want to change the people they voted for? And also that is not confirmed. So basically the Israelis and the Americans are not going toward anything confirmed or concrete that they can achieve in this war, apart having a very strong military power that is capable of destroying. To destroy, they can achieve that.
Yeah. Yeah, they can achieve that. We've already seen, and they're targeting a lot of civilian infrastructure. Of course, they've gone after government institutions. They've tried to assassinate the leadership, but at the same time, and I don't know, there have been some reports that maybe some of the IRGC's top leadership has been assassinated by these strikes. But there's also, Elijah, this fact that, or at least this, claim, a very strong claim by IRCG General Ibrahim Jabari, who says Iran is going to unveil weapons we've never seen before. Trump should know that Iran is equipped to fight for years, to fight the U.S. for years, which maybe we shouldn't be surprised by, because the United States has been launching a war of aggression in many different kinds of forms for years against Iran, and that all wars that the U.S. has fought have gone on for years. But this war seems like it's going to be different if it goes on for years. And as you said, the U.S. and Israel likely can't go on for weeks, let alone years.
Yes, that is true. They can't continue for weeks. However, there is an advantage that the Americans and the Israelis have. Because they started this unlawful war unprovoked, therefore they are the one who can end it. Because at the end of the day, if they say to Iran, okay, I want to stop this war, Well, they are the one who aggressed Iran. Therefore, the Iranians will not say, oh no, I want to continue. Because at the end of the day, for Iran, it's important to preserve the country and be able to stop the war, to reconstruct, and to make sure that the Israelis and the Americans did not achieve their objectives. Therefore, unfortunately, the Israelis and the Americans are the ones who started this war, and they can stop it, even if Iran is going to say, well, you start something you cannot stop, particularly if the Israelis and the Americans are failing to achieve their objectives. However, Iran, in my experience, will not continue bombing if the Americans and the Israelis have enough. At the end of the day, for Iran, as long as there are effective in the country and resources that are still intact, well, they would stop the war. So yes, the Iranian can continue because they thought about how to run this war for a very long time, thinking that if the Israelis and the Americans want to continue, then they can continue. Nevertheless, I don't think Iran is going to accept to stop the war without a proper deal. The June 2025 war stopped without a ceasefire. It has stopped just because Benjamin Netanyahu contacted Donald Trump, asked him to stop the war, and Trump called the Omani and the Qatari and asked them to mediate to stop the war, and that's it. There are no treaty, no deal, nothing. Today, the Americans and the Israelis have violated international laws. They attacked a UN member. They attacked a sovereign country unprovoked, and because they violated international laws, they don't care. Even if the ceasefire has little meaning because America proved to be untrustworthy starting the second time the war during diplomatic negotiations, nevertheless, the Iranian can always say, well, we've signed a deal and this is the end of it. But I mean, we're still in the first hours of the war. It's still too early to talk about the end of this foolish campaign.
Yeah, I mean, Israel itself has said this is going to last. I mean, you said it earlier, Elijah. This feels like, and this seems like, it looks exactly like Israel is at the head of the operation, or at least the brains of the operation. The United States is very much, being the great father of Israel and helping it where it needs to be helped. And I just wanted to pull up some other breaking developments here as we go on. There are reports from Al Mayadeen saying that among the targets of Iran's strikes so far has been the American radar station at a U.S. base in Qatar, the FPS-132. The radar is used to detect ballistic missiles and has a range of 5,000 kilometers, and it has an approximate cost of 1.1 billion US dollars. So again, the damage keeps coming, and we haven't gotten too much into Israel, but Israel is being hit. Israel was some of the first retaliatory strikes that Iran launched, and here you see Haifa, as during the 12-day war, getting the brunt of a lot of the damage. Tel Aviv as well. Elijah, I wanted to ask you this. Iran said was going to become a regional war if it occurred, and we immediately saw Yemen, Ansarallah, come out and say that they have now joined the war. They launched, I believe, a missile salvo at Israel, and there are some reports saying that they are closing the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, or at least they're going to target the aggressor parties there. So talk about this. Is this going to go regional, and are we about to see the Axis of Resistance, led by Iran, conduct a coordinated campaign against this act of aggression?
Well, it's too early to say it because it's already regional with the fact that there are 5 Gulf countries involved so far in this war. And they have been, the US bases have been bombed in these countries, but one can safely say that these countries have been bombed. So it is not really a war limited to Iran and to Israel. It's Iran, it's Israel, and there are Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the Emirates, Kuwait, uh, and good Jordan. So we have 6 countries that are involved so far, plus Iran and Israel and the United States, not as a country, but as effectives in the Middle East. Uh, if the Yemeni Ansarullah Houthis will come into this battle, most probably yes. The day Iran feels the need to close the Red Sea will be closed. And if the Strait of Hormuz will be closed, most probably yes, depending on the time this war is going to last, but not from day one. As I said, the Iranians don't play their cards immediately. Hezbollah, well, I think this is a great opportunity for Hezbollah to join the battle, regardless of the destruction, to impose a rule of engagement on Benjamin Netanyahu and stop his continuous daily violation of international law and Lebanon's sovereignty. Nevertheless, it's not going to happen from day one because Iran has started to fight back against those who aggress the country. We need to give it more time to start seeing if Iran needs to diverse the retaliation on different fronts, diverse the effectives of the attacking forces, in this case, the US, Israel, and their ally in the region, and then open different fronts, showing that the risk of spillover is really effective. And the biggest this war becomes, the most easy to stop it, because this is where other countries will intervene and ask the Americans to stop fighting on behalf of Israel. And the first who did that already is the Omani foreign minister. He is the one who acted as intermediate between Iran and the US, hosted the negotiation in Muscat, Oman, and in Geneva and in Vienna was supposed to do so. And he said the Americans are fighting this war on behalf of the Israelis and they should stop, because he also was told that the Americans were honest in the negotiation and discovered that they were not. So yes, it is becoming larger. The war is becoming larger. More countries involved, more forces are expected to join in if this war lasts for very long or for longer than expected, or if the damage is increasing on Iran, because if Hezbollah and Ansarullah don't fight back and join the battle along with the Iraqis, then after Iran, it is their turn, and they're fully aware of that. So it is in their advantage to divide the damage on different countries simultaneously and hope that they can impose a ceasefire that prevent Benjamin Netanyahu to violate the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon, to bomb Iraq, as he did today against Hasti Shabi in Jurf al-Sakhr, south of Baghdad. And for Yemen, it's certainly the turn of Yemen is coming after Iran, unless Yemen join in and there is a global deal that stops this war.
Yeah, no, the stakes are incredibly high, Elijah. And I wanted to ask you about what you believe caused, this whole process. We saw reports coming out of Politico where it said that the United States was looking for Israel to initiate the first strike because it looked better politically, it looked better for the United States, for the Trump administration. But then all of this has happened so fast, where Donald Trump came out and said that Americans are going to die in this war. And that, to me, this is shocking. I'm curious on what your thought process is about, and your analysis is of why the U.S., because I think we should really put that out there, that the U.S. Really makes all of this possible. Why the U.S. is going so hard for this? What caused this rush? Do you find that this strike is strategic in nature, or do you find that it's it's part of a calculation that's kind of gone awry, because we've seen the U.S. come up towards strikes on Iran a couple of times in the last month or so, and now we're here. This comes after the Pentagon was reporting or leaking that it was trying to advise against this.
It is not at all strategic for the United States, but it is for Israel, and I'll explain. Iran doesn't represent a danger to the Americans, because America is far away from West Asia, and the Iranians never took the initiative to attack an American target. It is vice versa, that the Americans took the initiative to attack Iran, and the Israelis did the same. Which means that there is no interest for the Americans when they are sitting and negotiating a nuclear deal after Donald Trump said that he had decimated and obliterated, these are his 2 words, the Iranian nuclear program. But because the JCPOA, the nuclear deal that was signed by Barack Obama in 2015, expired in October 2025, then Donald Trump wanted a new deal. Not because the last one was not good, but because it has ended, it had terminated automatically, even if he did terminate the deal in 2018 and pull out. And this is where the whole problem started between Iran and the United States. So the Iranians were ready to have US inspectors, UN inspectors, were ready to freeze the nuclear enrichment production, and to put it under the control of the IAEA, the nuclear organization, and to make sure that they are not enriching uranium more than 3.75% and 20% for medical and research purposes. In fact, Iran went to 60% only when Donald Trump pulled out of the deal in 2018, and then Iran, a year later, in 2019, started to enrich uranium until 60%, because the Americans imposed maximum sanctions and because the Israelis start killing more Iranian nuclear scientists. This is why Iran needed the leverage for the sanctions to be lifted and expressed its readiness to do so. And this is where the Americans were negotiating with the Iranians. So they were negotiating in bad faith, because during the negotiation, there was a meeting that's supposed to happen on Monday in Vienna. The Americans started the war on Sunday. So it's exactly like they've done in June 2025. Now, is this going to help America in any way? No, because the Iranians had no trust in the Americans, but now more than before. Is it strategic for Israel? Yes, because for Israel, it's important to be the only dominant force in the Middle East. The Iranians started to build up their influence in the Middle East due to the American intervention and unlawful wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and in Syria. So the vacuum was filled up partially by Iran, and this is where Iran collected behind the mistakes of the Americans. Right. That represents a danger to Israel, not immediately, but for Benjamin Netanyahu, it represents a danger to his political career, because he has elections in October 2026, this year, and he needs to sell the card that he really destroyed Iran, even if the Americans are doing the job. And if he sold for since the last 16 years the fact that Iran was days away or weeks away or a couple of months away from nuclear bomb, and we have never seen this nuclear bomb. Therefore, everything that Benjamin Netanyahu is advertising for is to create a chaos in Iran that has border with 7 countries, so creating a chaos in West Asia, that West Asia will never recover. Until now, Libya has not recovered from the 2011 war. And we're talking about 15 years after. Iraq, 2003, had not recovered, regardless the war and the end of it and everything that happened in Iraq. The Americans still are capable of threatening Iraq to choose and select a prime minister, even if it is the majority of the parliament selected the person. And I'm talking here about Nouri Maliki. So the Americans still have the leverage, and they still control the income of the Iraqi oil. So they still have their print in the Middle East. That is not Iran representing an existential danger, neither to America nor to the Israelis. And to say, like the American spokesperson, White House spokesperson, Levitt, that Iran is saying death to America, that is an existential threat, is quite idiotic and ridiculous for the simple reason that Iran doesn't have a nuclear bomb, and the Americans have thousands of nuclear bombs, the second country after Russia, if not competing Russia. Secondly, the Americans are the most powerful country in the world, and they have jets and airplanes and carriers, and they are surrounding Iran with the military bases. Therefore, the one who represents a real danger is the United States representing danger on Iran, is not vice versa.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, there's no denying this, and everything that you just said, Elijah, completely annihilates Donald Trump's justification, the 8-minute justification he gave at an undisclosed location, where he began straight up saying we are doing this to protect Americans from the Iranian regime, and I think a lot of Americans are looking around saying, what danger was this? There, I think, and now the United States is in this war. Do you find that what the U.S. is trying to do is similar to, the U.S. waged 2 different wars? I mean, it was waging, it was involved in a lot of aggression in the region, against Iraq and elsewhere, for many, many years. But we had the Gulf War, and then you had the invasion of 2003. In the Gulf War, with those sanctions, there was a lot of damage done. Do you find that this is kind of like a repeat of the same model? And does it stand to work in the same way as it did with Iraq?
Well, even worse, because Iran has a lot of natural resources apart from oil and gas. It's supplying the gas to Iraq, is selling the oil to China and to other countries. So it is important for the region to see Iran's stability. But what the Americans are unaware of is they are creating a destabilized country, and they have not learned the lesson from the war in Iraq, the war in Syria, and the war in Afghanistan, the war in Vietnam, the war in Libya. They haven't learned the lesson. And then we really don't understand what the Americans are trying to do. Donald Trump is saying, I've decimated and completely obliterated the Iranian nuclear missile, nuclear weapon or nuclear program. And then we have the inspector, the UN inspector, saying, well, there are no evidence that Iran has a nuclear weapon or can develop a nuclear weapon in the next weeks. And then we have Trump saying, I want to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapon. But if you have decimated the nuclear program, how Iran can have a nuclear weapon if there is no nuclear program according to what you have been advertising since June 2025 with these beautiful and lovely B-2 that came beautifully bombing the Iranian beautiful side. This is the language of Donald Trump is extremely poor, and it doesn't make any sense. So we're not dealing with a stable president and someone who is really knowledgeable about geopolitics to understand where he wants to go from here, before the war and after the war. When is he going to stop, and under which criteria? What are his objectives if this main objective is unachievable? We're not talking about balanced person who understand geopolitics. We're talking about a theatrical person who create diversion and shows and attraction on daily basis, but not a thoughtful policy for the progress of humanity, or at least for the benefit of the United States. How American people benefit from using billions of dollars in bombing a country that is far away like Iran on behalf of Israel. What is the gain of the American people? How this is contributing to their daily life? None. On the contrary, the price of oil will increase, the currency is going to be devaluated, and then this is what we are left with, along with Iran ruling system as it is. So we've seen these actions that irrational and honestly without any objective. So they just taken, just because Donald Trump thinks that it's a good thing to go and bomb Iran and still claim he is a peace president and he wants a medal of the Congress or the Nobel Prize. We don't really understand what the Americans are doing.
Well, those are great points, because we are seeing actually, and I want to try to pull this up here. We are actually seeing a bit of this crumbling that you mentioned, this lack of, you frame it as a lack of strategy, and a lot of the objectives, at least in the initial part of this strike, have not succeeded. And here is just breaking, actually, Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, was on NBC News as this is all going on, and he's talking about how the U.S. and Israel did not get any of the IRGC's leadership and the Iranian leadership as they had hoped. Here we go.
I appreciate your comments there, and we do have a series of other questions I want to ask you. But just for clarity for our audience right now, can you confirm with specificity that the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is alive, and separately that the Iranian president is alive right now following these American and Israeli strikes?
As far as I know, yes, they are alive, and the head of judiciary as well, the head of the Speaker of Parliament as well, all high-ranking officials are alive, and the secretary of the National Security Council. So everybody is now in its position, and we are handling this situation, and everything is fine.
So everything is fine. I mean, that doesn't sound like Elijah, like there's a lot of fear coming from. Is this all talk and bluster, or I mean, we hear all the warnings, we hear that Iran is ready to fight this for years, and now we hear publicly going on Western mainstream media, the foreign minister of Iran saying that at least for now, the U.S. and Israel have failed in this very key objective that Donald Trump announced to the world, getting rid of Iran's leadership.
Well, look, only Iranians can speak in the name of their country who should rule them or not. If there is a changing of the ruling system, it is up to the Iranian to go and vote for another system, or to rise in the street as protesters, not rioters, to destroy the country. When you stand against the economic situation or the ruling system, you don't go and destroy your own country. So far, the Mossad and the CIA said they have invested heavily in changing the regime in Iran. They failed. So any change that comes from the outside makes the ruling system much more rigid to any change, because they understand that there are Mossad or CIA forces behind it. This is what the CIA did with Mossadegh, the prime minister of Iran that was elected in 1952. Therefore, this is not something that is up to foreign countries to intervene in Iran. And the Iranian will say, yes, we are fine. And even if the leaders are not fine, they can be replaced, because leadership in ideological ruling, it's not made horizontal, it's not very made vertical, it's made horizontal. One person goes, another person is replaced. If there is a need to free the Iranian people, like Donald Trump said, it is none of his business. It is actually none of anybody's business but the Iranians. And they are the ones who are entitled to choose their ruling system. And you cannot convince them, because we've seen that in June 2025, what to do by bombing the country, because they're proud people. And all those who stand with the government and against the government in Iran and outside Iran stood against Israel in 2025. That was an unprecedented move from the Iranian population saying, we reject an outside interference. It doesn't mean we're happy. No, they're not happy. 47 years of sanctions doesn't make the Iranian people happy about the economy. On the contrary, the economy is suffering dearly. But allow them to survive if you are concerned about the Iranian people. Don't intervene, but don't sanction them so they can suffer and say, I am bringing the solution when you are the one who brought the problem in the first place. So Araghchi today, by saying, no, we are fine, he's defying the Americans and the Israelis and saying, we are determined to fight back. This is not the way you negotiate a deal with the Iranians. The way you negotiate a deal with the Iranians is to sit around the table and make sure you are not offending them, you are not destroying their pride, and you are not humiliating them, and you don't want to submit to you. You have concern, you express your concern, and it's up to the Iranian to make sure that there are no concern and there are verified element and mechanism, because there is no trust on both sides, that can ease the situation between Iran and the rest of the world. So far, since 1980, Jimmy Carter first sanctions, we have not seen this. We've seen only the world using a stick to the Iranian, with the Iranians, and hitting them in every single sanction to bring them to submission. And the Iranians will not submit.
And that's a big problem. And I think that's where the question is, well, where does this actually go, Elijah? Because the United States cannot accept Iran not submitting. Israel, of course, in similar vein, and maybe with even more ferocity due to their overall actual strategic vision that we know is so dear to them, the Greater Israel Project. So that's the big question. Where does this go? Because we knew that this war was coming. We don't know how long it's going to last in this round, but we know that this war is likely ongoing until one side loses and the other side wins. A lot of people maybe look at that as zero sum, and I think you articulated very well earlier that Iran doesn't necessarily have to win, but it seems like what Iran maybe has to succeed in doing is creating an actual deterrence through their response, showing that the damage is, and the cost of this is just far too grave.
I would like to say something here. There are many young people in Iran, women and men, who did not live during the Islamic Revolution 1979 and 1980, who did not see the Iran-Iraq war. They are young people who want the relationship with the West to be established on equal ground. The Iranians, during the last negotiation, are aware of that. They are fully aware that there are many Iranians who would like to have good relationship with the rest of the world. And this is why the government said, we are ready to give the Americans, not the Europeans, because they were European in 2015, and now they say we're ready to give the Americans contract with $4 to $5 trillion to invest in Iran. They're bringing America in to develop the country. This is what they want. They don't want death to America because they don't like the American system. On the contrary, they don't want the American regime to impose on them the way they have to live. And why do they do that? Only because they have seen the examples in Afghanistan, they've seen the examples in Iraq, in Libya, and in Syria. In Afghanistan, the Americans destroyed the country, and after 20 years, they removed Taliban to give it back to the Taliban 20 years later. In Iraq, until today, the war against Saddam Hussein in 2003, Not because Saddam Hussein is good or no, his word is very bad for his people, but they said they're going in for weapons of mass destruction. It was a lie. The Americans and the British confessed that. But then we see today Donald Trump in his first mandate, when the Iraqis asked the Americans to leave, he said no, because he holds 90% of the country's budget of selling oil that is pouring into the American Federal Bank before reaching Iraq. So he's holding them by the neck, and Iraq cannot be independent. He's using their airspace to bomb Iran. He bombs Iraq whenever he wants. He bombed the Iraqis who don't want the Americans in their country. So they've seen the example how the Americans went to Syria and occupied the northeast Syria, the oil and gas, Conoco and other gas and oil field for years when they pretend they are fighting ISIS. They've seen Libya from very prosperous country to a destroyed country. There's no stable government between Benghazi and Tripoli, and the situation is totally unstable. So they've seen all of that, and the Iranians actually don't want this. They want a good relationship with the West, but they don't want the West to impose the agenda and destroy their country because of these examples. And the Americans are not using a language of rapprochement. They're using the force, they're using the stick. They're saying to the Iranians, either you do what we want and they impose it on them, or we're going to bomb you, and they bomb them. So this is the lack of understanding from the West of the Iranian culture and the way how to approach Iran to tame it and to bring it close to the international society, when the world consider Iran as an enemy throughout the years only because the Americans are imposing these sanctions and want to control the oil. But the Iranians are ready to sell the oil to the Americans and to allow the American company to come and exploit the Iranian energy, but not according to the American condition, and not if the money of oil is sent to the American Federal Bank, like in Iraq, but it goes to the Iranian prosperity. This is the problem between Iran and the United States. And now the Americans are conducting a war on behalf of Israel, which means that the Americans are ready to sacrifice American citizens for the benefit of another side, and a foreign side like Israel, only because Israel wants to be the only power in the Middle East and want to use the stick of the Americans to do so. This is where this war is not going. Is the base of this war is wrong, and if it stops, it doesn't mean the problem is solved. On the contrary, the problem remains.
Elijah, it was great being with you. I have to use another platform for Professor Morandi, so I will do that now. I'll get him here, but I want to make sure everyone knows to visit your website in the video description before we go, and that we'll definitely be in touch in the near future as things develop. Thank you so much again, Elijah. Really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes, of course. It was wonderful. All right, everybody, stay tuned. Right now, we are going to go to Professor Morandi. I'm going to admit him into the Zoom so I can start to share the screen. I'll just say hello to him now as he comes in. Let's see how it goes. This is how we are going to get to our dear friend of the show, Professor Mohammad Marandi. I want to make sure that my self view is out of here. And if you can hear me, Professor Morandi, can you hear me? I'm going to share the screen now, see how that goes. I don't see him yet. Professor Morandi, you there? There he is.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can. But for some reason, you're not showing up here. I don't know what's going on with either. I don't know what's going on. It's not letting me. It keeps on saying that you're playing in picture here. That's so strange. I don't know what is going on with the picture, but let's see if it fixes itself. Now, there we go. All right, Professor Morandi, it's finally working. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing, Danny?
Things could definitely be far better. I know that this is a very difficult time for you and your country, and of course, a very shameful time for myself and my own country. So, Professor Morandi, maybe just your first initial reactions to what's been going on and how you are witnessing this there on the ground.
Well, first of all, it's not shameful for you or for anyone who has been opposed to the policies of this Epstein regime that's in power. Those who support it and those who are silent and indifferent, they're the ones who bear responsibility. But they've been responsible for a very long time. I just broke my fast, and I haven't been checking the news for a bit, but the situation is as you would expect. Many people are leaving the city. I'm in Tehran. I'll remain in Tehran until the war ends or I'm targeted. But the government has asked people who can leave to leave because the United States and the Israeli regime are both targeting civilians. I'm sure you've heard that this morning they targeted an elementary school, murdering 63 girls, and they've murdered school children elsewhere. They bombed a school in Tehran. Fortunately, they were just injuries. So schools are closed. Universities have been closed. They'll probably begin online work in a couple of days, just like during the previous 12-day war, where the Israeli regime and the United States, like this time around, were secretly plotting against Iran as the United States was negotiating. This time around, of course, Iran was much more prepared. We were expecting something like this. Actually, last night I was speaking to friends, and almost all of us thought that the possibility that they would strike while the Omani foreign minister was in Washington was very high. So this is where we are. The Iranians, of course, after the initial assault, have been striking back at U.S. targets in the Persian Gulf region, and also they've been striking the Israeli regime. Excuse me. Iran's allies are preparing themselves. We've seen statements from Iraq and Yemen. So we'll have to see where things go from here. But the catastrophe at the school, at the elementary school of girls, I wrote out a few tweets, and in one or two of them I said, the Epstein class, they have a particular interest in girls.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, a very good point, and thank you for correcting me, Professor Morandi, about that. Yeah, no, we have to make that distinction between the people of the United States and what the United States is doing abroad in Iran right now, because this is a very unpopular venture. Barely 20% of people in many polls say they supported this, and now the Trump administration is doing it anyway. And I wanted to get your reaction to, you said Iran has been striking back. Top Iranian officials are saying they're ready to go for years. I'm wondering what your reaction has been to the Iranian response. It's much quicker than during the 12-day war when there was the surprise attack. What has been your reaction to this, given where you are?
Well, first of all, it wasn't much of a surprise, and very few people were killed in the initial wave. So obviously, the country being much more prepared than it was last time round and preparing for war, and the fact that the assassination attacks by the Trump regime and its allied Netanyahu regime, the fact that they failed, I think main reason why the Iranians immediately struck back, and they've been striking back pretty hard. Of course, the Iranians are in it for the long haul, so they're going to take measured strikes. There are many calculations that they have to make, mathematical calculations when they fire missiles, how to get through air defenses, how to force the other side to use the enemy to use its air defenses. And we've already been told by an Iranian general that the armed forces are only using their very old missiles right now, and that the newer missiles will be used later on, and they will have much more devastating impact. But right now, they're using older missiles for obvious reasons, both because now's the time to use them, and also because they can figure out how air defenses work and force the enemy to use its interceptors, and at very little cost. And then, of course, many of the missiles, as we've already been seeing, have been getting through. And then when the air defenses are exhausted, as they will be within a not so long period of time, then Iran will start devastating the enemy in a very painful way.
Yeah, no, I mean it seems like that's exactly what's going on, Professor Morandi. What did you make of Donald Trump's announcement after the fact, after this occurred? He made a lot of very grand claims. He talked about this being an operation essentially to protect the American people from the Iranian government, or what they always say, the regime. And that there are all these objectives that the U.S. wants to achieve, including getting rid of the Navy, getting rid of the missile system, nuclear energy or nuclear enrichment, all of this. But essentially, get rid of everything, Professor Morandi. What's your reaction to this? And do you find it very convincing? Because for many Americans, this was a war that even Politico had to say was not very well justified from the very outset.
Well, first of all, I didn't even bother to watch it. I just read a summary, a few lines of it. This is the person who, during the 12-day war, demanded absolute surrender from Iran. What happened after 12 days? It was the Netanyahu regime that was begging Trump to get him a ceasefire. And from day 9 or 8 to 12, the Israeli regime was in serious trouble. And so what happened to that surrender? I wouldn't take anything that Trump says seriously. Of course, Trump is no different than a neocon. Those who believe that he was different, they were naive. Of course, we've already seen him expose himself over the Epstein files, and he's shown himself to be very much a part of the Epstein class. The entire regime is subordinate to the Epstein class. And you can shoot women in the face, white blonde women and white men in the back who are nurses for veterans, and get away with it. So that 20% that you're talking about, that's the sort of people that support Trump despite the Epstein files, despite the scandal, despite all the lies that we've seen over the past few months. Now then, this wars, of course, have continued. There's no difference between Trump and George Bush. There's no difference between Trump and any other Zionist, neocon, or member of the Epstein class. They're all the same. Iran, of course, is no threat to the American people. It never has been. And we saw how Witkoff, another Zionist, was lying last week saying that Iran is about to build a nuclear weapon. Just 8 months ago, Trump said Iran's nuclear program was obliterated. So in 8 months, Iran can build a nuclear weapon from an obliterated program that was, by the way, completely peaceful and under the supervision of the or being monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. All the assets that the American regime and the Netanyahu regime destroyed, they were all monitored by that international body. And then, of course, we saw the outrageous claim that Iran is making missiles, building missiles that can strike the United States. This is all 2003 stuff. It's the same lies. But the difference is that Iran is not Iraq. And the axis of resistance is a very, very powerful force. And the dedication of the Iranian people and the Iranian armed forces are not like Iraqi armed forces under Saddam. Iranians are united, and we will see in the coming days where things stand and who, at the end of the day, is going to have to back down. But this is going to come at a very heavy price to the world. And when markets open on Monday, I think we're going to see the beginning of that.
Yeah. That's those are great points, Professor Morandi. And what do you make of, I was conversing with Elijah Magnier earlier, and I talked about, and we both talked about how this is kind of a historic response in many ways by Iran, because Iran rapidly, when we talk about the strikes that Israel and the US began within, I don't know what exactly the time was, but it wasn't more than a couple of hours till we saw the Iranian response. And now that response is hitting US bases, Professor Morandi. So in many ways, it's historic. What has been your reaction to this? Because this is something that I don't think the United States has really ever experienced at this scale and at this level. And we're hearing that this is just the beginning.
I think everyone should have expected it. This is something that I've been warning from the very beginning, that Iran's capabilities are enormous. Iran has been preparing for a US attack for 2.5 decades at least since the United States invaded Afghanistan and then contemplated invading Iraq when Iran was declared the axis of evil. And then when Bush and then later Obama started saying that all options are on the table, Iran has been preparing itself since then. And most of Iran's military capabilities are not directed towards the Israeli regime. That's a sideshow for Iran. Iran's assets are directed towards the United States. They're directed towards the Persian Gulf, the Indian Ocean. Why? Because that has always been the threat. So they have countless underground military bases, drones, short-range missiles, medium-range missiles that are very easily maneuverable. They don't need to be moved around with heavy vehicles. The United States has made an extraordinary mistake. And of course, the Persian Gulf is the most sensitive place on this planet, arguably, because 20% of the oil comes from the Persian Gulf itself. And then from West Asia and the Caucasus, almost roughly, I guess, 25% of the world's oil is exported or is produced and exported. And then, of course, there's the natural gas as well. So Iran has been prepared. It's been prepared for a long time, and even people on the streets weren't fooled. Whenever you and I would have a discussion or on other shows, I would always say that the Iranians are negotiating for two reasons. One, in the highly unlikely chance that the United States behaves reasonably and wants to really have a deal, the Iranians are prepared for it. But the major reason, the number one reason, is so that the Iranian people, the international community, everyone would see that Iran tried to solve this crisis And the United States did exactly what it did during the 12-Day War, or right before the 12-Day War. It was negotiating not in good faith, as an act of deception. But this time around, no one was deceived. Last time around, I'm not sure if we can say that Iran was deceived. And I think what Iran did not expect was an attack on senior commanders and academics and scientists in Tehran and other cities. They didn't expect them to target apartment blocks and murder everyone in the apartment building so that they can get one person. But this time around, the Iranians were completely prepared. And as I said, even I and friends, when we were talking last night as the Omani foreign minister who went to Washington, we were all saying that the chances of a US attack are high because the United States is a completely discredited rogue regime.
Yeah, Professor Morandi, when I saw it actually, I didn't know what time it was going to happen. I didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but everyone was telling me this weekend, and I was like, maybe, sure. We can see all the writing on the wall, but when the Omani negotiator went on mainstream media and essentially said a deal is close, when he said that, I thought this sounds almost like a plea, and that to me made me think that this strike was coming soon, and here we are.
Yes, and also it's interesting that they carried out these attacks as children had just arrived at school in the morning. And of course, as I said, there was a major massacre in Minab city where so far 63 kids have been slaughtered and their teachers at a girls' elementary school. But that's just how that's the United States. That's the Epstein class. That's who these Zionists and these neocons are. They are barbaric. Remember, they already have 2 ceasefires in Lebanon and in Gaza. Every day they're murdering Lebanese citizens. In Gaza, every day they're murdering multiple Palestinians. The Western media looks away. Why? Because the Western media is owned and controlled by the Epstein class. So no one in Iran ever believed that Trump was trustworthy or the regime in Washington is in any way or form trustworthy. No one in Iran expected the Europeans to take a principled stance. Iran expected the Europeans to side with aggression and murder and terror because that's who they are. They're just like during the previous war. That's exactly the position that Australia, the Europeans, the Canadians, that's the exact position they all took. Murdering people is fine with them. The hypocrisy is all gone. And in our region, Erdogan's regime, they've been allowing NATO AWACS planes to fly and gain intelligence from Iran. The US is using its base in Turkey. Shameless, utterly shameless, as he continues to provide the Israeli regime with cheap oil from Baku. Persian Gulf regimes, you see that the US bases there, they've been plotting against Iran this whole time, and now they complain that Iran is striking at them. They're a part of the problem. Without these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, there would be no attack on Iran. The Jordanian regime and the Saudis, they're all heavily involved in this. Right now, the sound, I don't know if you heard, there was an explosion. I don't know if you can hear it.
Yes, I can.
So that's how things are. This is the situation that we're dealing with. We're dealing with Iran, whose sin is that it is independent, that it supports the Palestinian people, and no one else does, except for the axis of resistance. No one does. It's all fake. Qatar, fake. Turkey under Erdogan, fake. They're all a part of the US. They're all in the US camp. They may dislike the Emiratis, and the Emiratis may dislike them, but they're all the same. And the Iranians are opposing genocide in Gaza. They're opposing US policy in Cuba and Latin America. These are Iran's sins. And so they sanction the country, they strangle the country. Western journalists That's not what they say. They don't talk about the strangulation. They don't talk about the terrorism. They try to demonize Iran to pave the way for these sort of atrocities. Even those who pretend to be anti-war, they're with the Western regimes. Those who are in the mainstream media, they say, well, just like I was telling you before, Maduro's evil, but we shouldn't act. We shouldn't strike. These people are just as evil as the neocons. Those who are evil are the Americans who send terrorists into Iran, the Israeli regime that sends terrorists into Iran, that strangle Iranian women and children through sanctions, and now bomb elementary schools in Iran. These are the evil ones, not the Iranian government. The Iranian government, the state, the leadership in Iran, morally speaking, is infinitely above the entire Epstein class that governs the West. And they are fighting to defend the country, and they're fighting to defend the dignity and honor of the Palestinian people. The axis of resistance for the last 2 years, for over 2 years now, has been making sacrifices, whether in Lebanon, whether in Yemen, whether in Iran, in order to stop the genocide. And what do we hear from the other side? We hear the US ambassador in occupied Palestine saying that if they take the entire region, it's fine. That's unofficial US policy. That's unofficial Western policy. Have no doubt about it. That's their unofficial policy. Just like I've always been saying, the two-state solution that they've been in the West has been talking about for decades, especially the Europeans, it was always a lie. It was always to buy time for the Israeli regime to colonize the West Bank. It was always a lie. So this is it's just dishonesty from beginning to end and top to bottom.
Yeah, well, speaking of honesty, dishonesty, hypocrisy, there are reports, Professor Morandi, there's such a swirl of psychological warfare, information, misinformation coming out. Reports now, Israeli media are saying that there are growing signs that Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been killed. Iran has denied this. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi was just on NBC News saying that they are just fine, and that actually the top IRGC commanders that the U.S. and Israel were targeting are fine. What do you make of these reports?
We're going to be hearing a lot of disinformation in the next few hours and days and perhaps weeks ahead. And I think that people should ignore Western legacy media, and they should go towards and use alternative media. And my own Twitter account, the people I follow, these are the people I would advise your viewers, if they're interested, to follow as well, including yourself. As I said, there's no difference between Western mainstream media, whether it's The Guardian or Fox News. They're all the same. One may be more bombastic and one less so, but they all belong to the empire. They're all dishonest. And I think after Gaza, that should be clear to everyone. So when they demonize Iran and pretend that Iran's gunning down peaceful protesters and all that, and all those lies, if anyone believes that after Gaza, then they just want their eyes to remain closed. So in the days ahead, those who are politically aware should ignore Western media. The West will fail. The United States will fail in this war. The Israeli regime will fail in this war. It will turn out to be a big mistake. And the axis of resistance will remain intact and remain strong, and it will be a step forward in the liberation of the Palestinian people. And again, let's go back to the problem. The problem is that the Epstein class says that Israel should rule the region, and the Iranians are saying Palestine should have equal rights for Jews, Christians, and Muslims so that they can live peacefully side by side. This is the position that the Western media Western think tanks find outrageous and unacceptable, that is the position that the Iranians find unacceptable and outrageous. Figure out who is moral and who is immoral.
Yeah, and Professor Morandi, I wanted your reaction. I just thought of this. Iran has connected its response, its retaliation to the U.S. and Israel with actually October 7th. It said it was going to be a regional war. And I believe, and you speak the language, and so I believe the operation is called in English something like the end of the flood. And I'm wondering if you could react to this because it's very historically significant. It's not just called Operation True Promise 4, even though there are those calling it that all over social media. So talk about this and the regional part of this war on the axis of resistance side, because we've seen Yemen come into the fray on Sarallah. And there are reports that at some point, if it comes down to it, Hezbollah might join. But we also know Iraq has been activated to some degree. So your reaction to this and the significance of Iran choosing this particular label for its response?
I don't know if this label has been chosen or this name has been chosen. I have heard True Promise 4, but I haven't heard this. I'm not saying this is not true. I just haven't heard it. But I've been busy a lot these days, and there are some things that I haven't covered properly. So I'm sorry if I can't give you a more precise response. I've heard, as I said, from Iranian social media accounts, like media outlets, that this is True Promise 4. I don't know actually even if it's been officially called True Promise 4, but that's what I've seen in social media. But what is important is that the Trump regime fails and that the empire recognizes that there is one country on this planet that is not intimidated by the United States, that will not kneel. And that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And direct threats that we've seen over the last few years, and especially the last few months, and in particular the last few weeks, we saw that they did not create any fear among the Iranian leadership. And people do not live in fear now. We are in the right, and they are criminal and evil. And we are defending ourselves against a rogue regime that is increasingly becoming more rogue than ever before. And we are alone in this fight, except for the axis of resistance. The entire region is basically a part of the U.S. It's a U.S.-led constellation, and some of them pretend to be supportive of the Palestinian people, but in reality, none of them are. And the fact that U.S. bases are active, and as we speak, they are full of American soldiers, as we see through the surface-to-air missiles that they fire. It's clear where they stand. So this is not going to be an easy war. Seeing the images of the dead girls, I think, is enough for us to recognize that there will be a lot of people who die in the days and perhaps weeks to come. And the regime in Washington is completely immoral, and the Israeli regime is the same. And Western journalists are basically legacy media journalists. They're basically foot soldiers for empire. So we don't expect them to tell the truth. But things are going to go downhill for the United States and for its ally in the region. And I think that is going to increase pressure on Trump. So I think this is the end of the Trump I think this is going to be the end of the Trump regime. In one way or another, this is going to be the end of his presidency. I'm not saying that he's going to be removed from power anytime soon, but I think this is going to be the end of the presidency.
Well, Professor Morandi, we said earlier that this is a massively unpopular venture, that no poll shows that anywhere close to a majority of people in the United States support this. But even the Western mainstream media has had to, well, I have to say it's very tepid. The New York Times, for example, wrote a whole editorial board piece about how Donald Trump was being irresponsible and that there are more responsible ways to wage war. I don't know if that's the justification or that's the kind of path
Well,
that we want to be. Oh, yeah, please.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple of things. First of all, the New York Times and the other media, they are completely hypocritical because they also have been encouraging an attack on Iran. I think what they wanted to do was to have an attack, but also to attack Trump so that they can have their cake and eat it too. Because they're part of the same political regime, but they would like to use this as an opportunity to attack Trump. Otherwise, we've seen many articles in the New York Times talking about overthrowing Iran, attacking Iran. So it's not as if they're any different. And the premise is, in any case, is that Iran is evil and the U.S. is good, and it's the opposite. And the New York Times, therefore, they, along with Fox News and everyone else, they strengthen the narrative. The only difference is that whether this is good policy or bad policy, not whether that we're the good guys and they're the bad people. So, and of course, the New York Times, of course, has been behind the genocide this whole period. So, of course, this is, no one should think that there's any moral position being taken here. No, they would like to undermine Trump because of their own rivalries within the Epstein camp. And in addition to that, I think that the unpopularity of the war, this actually reminds me of, when you said that, it reminded me of General Soleimani, because he once called Trump a gambler. I think perhaps that Trump knows how bad things are for him in the United States and how unpopular he's becoming and how it's going to probably get much worse without the war. And so he took a big gamble. And he thought that if he wins this war and he crushes the Iranian people, slaughters people, but gets his way, which he won't, that this may turn things around. So he's betting on some sort of victory. That's how I see it. And of course, I would like to add that General Soleimani also said that we are the nation of Imam Hussein, and that we're not going to be intimidated by the regime in Washington.
Yeah, and Professor Morandi, we have people in the audience wanting to ask you. Everyone wants the opinion of on this show of the next step for Iran in terms of this retaliation. There have been reports that already a U.S. Navy support vessel has been heavily damaged by Iran's retaliation, and Ayatollah Ali Khamenei said that targeting an aircraft carrier may be in play here. Do you find that could be the case, especially if this thing goes on for a while, with Israel saying 4 days at least? I don't think we can believe anything that comes out of the U.S. and Israel's mouth. Trump was talking about it as being a longer term operation, not just a one-off or 2 days. So your thoughts on this?
Well, as I said, Iran has lots of things up its sleeve, and I think we'll see a lot more of that in the days ahead. The Iranians are not showing their capabilities yet. What we're seeing right now are strikes with medium range, long range missiles, drones that are all 10, 15 years old. But in the coming hours and days, I think you're going to see Iran reveal greater capabilities. Again, the United States and the Israeli regime will continue their slaughter, but they will not win this war.
And I know you have a very busy schedule, so maybe we can come to a close soon. Just a few more final questions. One, what have you made of, you mentioned in the region that all of these Gulf states, these Arab monarchies, et cetera, that host U.S. bases have been speaking out of the side of their mouth in terms of not allowing an attack. Well, now I believe Saudi Arabia has said that it's going to collaborate fully now with the United States against Iran, now that there have been reports of Saudi Arabia's U.S. bases, or the U.S. bases occupying Saudi Arabia, have been targeted. What do you make of this development? And perhaps you can also talk more about, there's a lot have been made of the region. We've talked about the ISIS resistance, these client states of the U.S. and Israel. But this is going to have global ramifications. So maybe we can close on both of these points.
Well, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates are fully complicit, as well as the others. And the United States is using Saudi Arabia to strike Iran. Its aircraft is based, many of them are based in Saudi Arabia. So the Saudi regime has nothing to complain about. If they get involved in conflict with Iran, they will definitely lose. They were unable to fight a war despite full Western support. They were unable to defeat Ansar Allah. And at the end of the day, when Ansar Allah began to destroy their oil assets, they accepted a ceasefire. We all recall that. So none of these family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf are inherently stable nor powerful. So the smart thing for them to do would be to tell the Americans to leave. But when their bases are being used and jets are flying and planes that carry fuel for the jets are flying from these bases, they're in no position to complain about anything that Iran does. So Iran will continue to strike as long as it feels that it's being threatened. And it will strike wherever it feels that it's necessary to strike. All U.S. interests in the region are fair game. All of them. That's how the Iranians see it, and that's how they're going to act. And while the days ahead will be dark, and many innocent people will die, but the Iranians will make sure to see this through. And those in the West who've been supporting anti-Iranian policies, they should take a look at those little girls who've been massacred at their elementary school and reflect on their behavior.
Yeah. And then lastly, Professor Morandi, I mean, I think this is a point. It's like it comes full circle. We have the absolute heinous war crimes, genocidal war crimes. It all connects. What happens and what's been happening to Palestinians now, this war on Iran, we see that the victims of it are essentially linked, if not mirrors of each other. And then, of course, we have this larger explosion that might come from this war that actually all of the Western mainstream media is saying, at least all the economists and investors and all of them are saying, that this is going to have heavy impact globally on the economic situation. Your final thoughts on this as we close out here?
Oh yes, this is going to be the global economic situation is terrible. It's already very bad, and it's going downhill. We all know that. But this is going to make things far worse. And depending on the behavior of the regime in Washington and its sidekick in Tel Aviv, things can get much worse. The Iranians will have no difficulty in shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran will have no difficulty in destroying tankers, oil installations, and gas installations. And that would mean that even if the war comes to an end and the Strait of Hormuz is opened, it will take years to get back to where things were before. So Americans should think twice about the regime in Washington, about their foolishness, their immorality aside. But when things go downhill, even the MAGA people who are utterly immoral and support Trump despite Epstein and everything else, even the MAGA people, when the economy goes downhill, they'll turn against him.
Yeah, well, everybody, I want to make sure, I hope that you all can thank Professor Morandi. I mean, he's doing something incredibly brave, and as well as just spending so much of his time, especially during Ramadan. Everyone should remember that the U.S. and Israel struck Iran during Ramadan, that it also did so, as Professor Morandi said, during the school hours and literally targeted schools. So this is absolutely, I mean, we're seeing the mask, if there ever was one, and if there was any mask left to rip off, be completely ripped off. And Professor Morandi, I want to thank you so much. We'll head out together for joining me today, especially in this time. And of course, I'm sure I speak for everyone who says that we hope that you remain safe and that we appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you, Danny, and I thank all of your viewers, and I hope they all do what needs to be done. I have advocated that across the world, people who are politically active should boycott everything that's American, Israeli, of course, and even Western as much as possible. And people should be protesting wherever they can. And hopefully we will see better days ahead. Many will die, but those who survive after this war, I think that things will be much more difficult for the empire, and that is a good thing for humanity.
Indeed. Well, everybody, I'm actually back in 3 hours with our mutual friends, Rachel Blevins and KJ No, which was planned ahead of this absolutely criminal war of aggression on Iran. So do join us in about 3 hours, 2 p.m. Eastern time. You can find that already on the page. Do hit the like button before you go, so Professor Morandi's conversation with me, as well as Elijah Magnier's, gets pushed in the algorithm. We're going to head out together, everybody. See you in a couple hours. Bye-bye.